Welcome to the Lucent Perspective. I'm your host, Rebecca Hastings. I've spent over a decade working with executives in the tech sector and helped successful companies build their leadership teams and scale. During my career, I've been lucky to have the privilege of learning from many exceptional leaders. In these conversations, you'll get perspectives from peers, be inspired, and learn what it takes to become one of the best. This is your chance to listen to experts talking about the challenges, solutions, and the vital insights they've gained in their careers to date. I'm joined by Richard Quinn. Until recently, Richard held the role of Chief Operating Officer at Kpler, which is a fast-growing data and analytics business serving the commodity markets. Prior to this, he was the Chief Strategy Officer, and he led a strategic transformation of the business, which opened up new areas of growth. Interestingly enough, underpinning the firm's first fundraising, which was $200 million. Prior to Kpler, Richard was Chief of Staff for Trustpilot, the customer review platform. There, among other things, he was responsible for helping to develop and implement Trustpilot's strategy ahead of their London listing in 2021. And before that, he worked for Verisk Analytics and Wood MacKenzie in a number of senior roles, devising and executing strategy, undertaking M&A, and leading some quite substantial teams there. So I'm super excited to have Richard as a guest, and I think there's loads that we can learn from him about leadership, mergers and acquisitions, and scaling businesses. Richard, obviously, you've had a career that involves some really fast-growing and rapidly evolving companies. Tell me, first of all, a little bit about your journey to the C-suite so that people have that context.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here. My journey to the C-suite is, like many people, it's not a linear, straightforward, one role leading to another. There have been periods where there was the opportunity to see ahead. And so I think of my early years, there was bigger teams, more responsibility and complexity. But there was a pivotal moment at Wood MacKenzie where I went from leading functional teams to working with the CEO of that business. And the transformation there of perspective, if you like, was to go from one part of the business and understanding it to understanding all parts of the business and how you bring those elements together. And that role at Wood Mac, supporting this chief executive, then opened doors into Verisk Analytics, which refined my approach to how do you tackle strategy formation. What does execution really mean, and particularly M&A. And then my first C-suite role into Trustpilot allowed me to bring together those two pieces of the puzzle. How do you help run a business, and what does growth look like, and how do you accelerate it?
So that's a really good summary. Thanks for covering what really has been a lot there. But I guess it would be good to find out a little bit more about your insights around scaling transactions and leadership, as I'd said. So first of all, I'd like to start with scaling. There's a couple of companies you've worked in that have scaled. So it would be great to know, first of all, a bit about the kind of common obstacles you saw, and any warning signs that a leader who's listening to this could be vigilant for in their company.
Agreed, and scaling is one of the buzzwords of the industry, and something that all companies are looking to do, where you deliver more product at a more efficient rate than you previously did. But at a really tactical level, that is often hard to define and describe. And so when, as a leadership team, you are looking to scale and given the challenge to scale by the board, one of the first steps is what does that really mean for us, right? As we think about the next hire, is it best to get somebody into sales? Is it better to get someone into technology and engineering? Where is the greatest opportunity to scale across our organization? And often it's very unclear where that scale can come from. Particularly when you think of all divisions will be asking for more people, and you need to break the cycle of more people delivers more growth, because that is a classic mindset. That then leads into the challenge of how do you determine the priorities? There will be, like all good businesses, 200 good priorities, and you need to be able to whittle that down to a manageable number that actually allow them to meet the definition of a priority. You can't do everything immediately. Not everything will deliver the same benefit. Some will be fixing a hole in your back office. Some will be opening up a new market or a new product. Which of those is more important, and which gives you, confidence to scale sooner? That is not a straightforward question. And then that then leads to alignment around, does the business really work together to deliver that?
Yeah, totally. And it's great to hear you say that more people doesn't always deliver growth, because there's companies that I've worked with over the years, they think they're scaling because they're throwing bodies at the problem. They're not
Mm-hmm.
getting any like increase in productivity that's more that like, that's above the regular proportion. It becomes a little bit linear. And I think people think that that's like quite a bit of success attached to having a big team, rather than
Agreed.
the opposite of how could I have done that with fewer people, because that would be more cost effective, probably faster sometimes. And
Agreed.
yeah,
Agreed. And
and
more people means longer communication chains, more complexity, more buy-in. At the same time, more people brings diversity of opinion, and
yeah,
and so you
that's true.
bring in, new expertise. And so, if you're entering Asia, having someone who has been and lived through that experience is absolutely critical. So some new employees and new people to the business is a very logical addition, and others it's more difficult to determine how that's going to fit in and how that's going to add to the growth.
And the other thing that shone through to me was really that kind of like strategic prioritization. And
Mhm.
I think, like when you're busy, it's easy to forget to do those things. But before you're adding headcount to things, I guess it's always good to think, what's the purpose of the role? What's the business need? How does this enable growth? But then how does this enable me to grow faster and better than any of my competitors and gain some kind of advantage?
Agreed. And there's a real balancing act between prioritizing down to, I don't know, 3 to 5 things that you think are worth investing in and putting people and time and effort and focus behind, without losing the flexibility to deal with market change.
Hmm.
Right, and depending on the nature of the business, things can come and go in their enthusiasm, and is this really going to deliver what we imagined it to? And so, what you're not you need to create an opportunity to come together and deliver on the plan without losing flexibility that you can adapt to a regulatory change, or and a competitor does something, and you need to be able to respond to that. So it's not determining the strategy, the how do you deliver on a goal needs to be really flexible and constantly reevaluated, so that you spend enough time making progress on a new product development versus flip flopping so much that you never get anything done.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of magic in there.
So thinking about like other lessons around scaling. Uh, when you were at Trustpilot, one of the things that we discussed was how you helped really like scale their sales and marketing operations. And like I would say that what you did there is true scaling. So can you tell me a bit about that and what happened there?
Yeah, the business is an enormous factory of data, if you like. So it is collecting consumer reviews across thousands of different businesses by tens of thousands of consumers, and organizing that information internally, not just for consumers to understand the review profile of a particular vendor that they might be interacting with, but making it available to the sales force so that they call the right business at the right time to effectively help someone, the customer, to scale. Right now, when does a customer who's currently collecting 10 reviews a month but they think they can get to 30, at what point do you call them to say we can help you take that jump from 10 to 30? Is it at 15 or is it at 27 reviews a month? And so the internal data and analytic tools that were built was partly around dashboards that allowed prospects to be high graded across
Hmm.
all geographies, where you would put in front of a sales executive the best 10 companies to call.
Mm-hmm.
And that was meeting each of those customers. Each of those prospects would be at the right stage in their maturity and the use of the free version of the product to then be able to convert into a paying customer. So it was bringing and unearthing that information to effectively empower our sales to be more effective. The second piece of the puzzle was a simplification of what we were selling. Sort of the ethos of that project was, how do we make it simple to buy and simple to sell? Previously there was lots of iterations of the product, and there was complexity of whether modules were in or out, and am I going to be able to get automatic reviews collection at this scale in this geography? And our new packaging and pricing took away a lot of that complexity. It was a lot more transparent to the customer of what they were actually getting for a particular price point. It better matched the range of businesses that Trustpilot serve, whether they be very, very small businesses where there are 2 employees, all the way through to large enterprise global businesses with hundreds of thousands of employees. And the product was adaptable to that. And the way that we sold, therefore, scaled alongside those. So it just transformed the time to acquire a new paying customer went from many days and often weeks to months down to we improved that to hours in many cases.
Amazing. That's the salesperson's dream. Because
when they really got onto it, and you worked out how to utilize it, it made them a lot more effective. So yes, their commissions were bolstered in the process.
But I'm sure that made you very popular. Um, simplifying processes is, I sometimes think, like much harder than overcomplicating them.
Completely agree, and it's by the definition of simplifying, it's actually not simple at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, how do you do it effectively? How do you, design to the majority, not to all of the exceptions to the rule? There are things in there that you can follow, but it often takes a lot of common sense to make work.
Yeah, and it's not just about having access to the data and the data being good, or as simple as knowing how to analyze, like being able to analyze the data. I think it's sometimes about knowing the right questions to ask, and in an ever-changing environment, that's really tough.
I completely agree with you. I think the other part of it, this wasn't my responsibility, but there was a gentleman who was incredibly effective at doing this, was effectively treating our own sales team as the customer.
Mm-hmm.
How do you put an internal product in front of them that they have been part of the journey of designing it? They have been part of the journey of how, so that they feel empowered rather than being given yet another software tool that they've got to use. Their resistance to using internal tooling was often pretty high, because it was seen as being, I've got to fill in more data into Salesforce, for example.
Mm-hmm.
One of many. There was a real stakeholder management piece to get their buy-in, rather than just thrusting a new product and saying, use this. This will make you more effective. That was both insulting, and we needed their input into making it work. And there was a particular gentleman who I won't name who did that incredibly well at interacting between 2 parts of the business, those building and creating the internal product, and unearthing the data, and then working with the Salesforce, a global organization, to make that actually work.
Interesting. So overall, scaling is not simple. What would be the main thing that you would advise a company to watch out for or to focus on?
Good question. I think you're trying to strike the balance between having a healthy debate around what is the best thing to do. So anything that looks like false harmony is something to be really mindful of. Nor do you want misalignment to pervade where nothing gets done. So you're looking for creating an environment where the senior team and then everybody who does all the real work is able to see that there has been a healthy debate around, should we do A versus B? We've decided to go for B, right? Let's all get behind that. And so, creating an environment where there is difference of opinion, and that's entirely healthy. And Patrick Lencioni has described this as healthy, which is the reason why I'm using that word. Of how do you create that trust and humility across your senior people, so that they can say, look, I don't understand why that would be the right thing. Please help me with why you think, or why you're so committed to that. And that person not feeling that as a personal attack, but actually just an intellectually rigorous discussion of one option versus the other.
Yeah. And I think it's often overlooked in terms of attributes in leaders is that ability to have dialogue rather than just communicate. That they're totally different skills, but they're easily confused.
Completely. And you know, leading a business is all about really driving change, and fundamentally delivering change meets resistance by people who perceive or are right in recognizing that change will mean loss. Right, it'll be a loss of influence or a loss of control, or their job needs to change, and they're quite comfortable working with exactly how they're operating. And that my example of using the salespeople, they were a key stakeholder in delivering the scaling of that operation. Why? Because they were quite happy operating with their existing process. Right? Now, they didn't want to have to work in a different way. They needed to be gently given the opportunity to make that transition into a new way of high grading who they call and their prospect list. And many thought they were very good at it, and some of them were. But as an enterprise and an organization, we needed the majority to transform in the way that they identified who they should call in at the right time. And all of this is a transformation of the organization. And there are always 100 reasons why change is sort of resisted by individuals at the C-suite, or the masses who don't understand or are resistant to it.
So moving on, like while you were at Verisk, Wood Mac, and Kpler, you were involved in a lot of strategic M&A activity. I think at one point during a 3-year period, you're involved in the acquisition of 7 companies with a combined transaction value of $400 million, whilst also being involved in preparing for the sale of Wood Mac to Verisk. And I know that more recently you've been involved in more acquisition activity and more transactions. So it would be great to get your insights into the following. So, like, first of all, when should a company seek to grow via acquisition? Because we've covered off the throwing bodies versus scaling. When do you think acquisition is key?
Good question. I think, particularly with the businesses that we were looking to buy from, it is where through M&A you can get access to assets faster, or faster, more quickly, more convincingly, or cheaper than if you were to build them. And the data and analytic world that I've worked in for many, many years, there is often enormous value attributed to the historical aggregation of data over many, many years. So you can't just restart being competitive in a new space if you're missing the previous 20 years of commodity data or fiscal data in Algeria, or whatever the example might be. And so as an M&A play at Wood Mac and Verisk, we were looking for data assets that were truly unique and proprietary. And often the only way to get access to them was to buy the business who had spent the previous decade or more building that data that was unique in the market. And we spend a lot of time discarding things that didn't meet that criteria. If it doesn't have proprietary data, let's not do it. Now that philosophy and that strategic logic doesn't apply to every business, and certainly the M&A that we were doing at Kpler, we didn't follow that sort of routinely. That was the first deal was partly around customer acquisition. We were winning with a better product in the US market. It was going to take time. Each contract as it renews, we might win it or we might not. We were doing pretty well. Wouldn't it be better if we just buy out the competition and get it done in all in one fell swoop? And that's the opportunity so that was an acceleration point rather than a proprietary data. And it turned out that Kpler data had fantastic data that we ultimately benefited from by getting access to as well. So it's context is everything, right? There's no sort of, we've had a certain size and scale, and part of M&A is seeing it beyond just getting the deal done, right? There is clearly an enormous excitement and enthusiasm, and everybody wants to be involved in the sexy bit of getting the deal done. That's not where the value is created. The value is created in the months afterwards, where you deliver on the plan of integrating intelligently.
So things that are going to get you to your end goal faster and cheaper, but also kind of like give you that leap or something that propels you forward.
I'm a kind of classic individual who uses analogies all the time, right? And so if you think about it, the ingredients of a cake, right? If this is the only place to get eggs or flour or milk to bake your cake, well then you find a way of doing that rather than pretending you can get it elsewhere. And that's how you aggregate more data. And the 1 + 1 = 3 philosophy was how we tended to operate.
So beyond that, and making sure that you're, getting the eggs for your cake, to use your analogy, what kind of things should you be looking for in a company? If you're thinking about acquiring them, like, is there anything you think that is easy to overlook or forget about?
I think all businesses are made up of people, and so you can take a very financial microscope to a business and look at its growth and its quality of earnings and net dollar retention, and make a judgment of the quality of the business. If you're thinking of the business being a sustainable series of assets within your organization, you need to be evaluating the people as well, and that is a cultural assimilation, and as well as a sort of are these the right people to take the business forward? So it's a very in my world we took a very structured approach to evaluating businesses. We measured the ripeness of the management team to grow. We measured the the penetration into the market and how embedded is it into the ecosystem that it's selling into. Is there a steady state of innovation? Are they continuing to redevelop? And all of those are nothing more than sort of key indicators of innovation is a great culture of reinventing yourself, right? So it points to people creating good things and thinking about how do we remix the ingredients to come up with a different outcome. And part of that then also points to expertise. Is the business that is up for sale genuinely expert in their space? And are you sort of slightly intimidated by how much they know? Because that's a great sign, rather than people who are haven't been around long enough and don't really understand the power market or the oil and gas market or whatever the space that you're exploring.
Yeah, so there's some great things there to think about if you're going to look at acquiring a company, but also if you are a tech company or a data company that's looking to be acquired. I think that people don't always think about articulating all the aspects of value that they offer.
I agree, and I think younger companies are getting very good at it. I think there is a lot more emphasis about designing your business with an exit in mind. But for more established businesses that have been around for 20 years, where they have been run typically by a founder who is an expert in their particular part of the industry, and then they've built a business around her or him, their expertise. They tend not to think of the exit until it actually happens. And therefore, then there's a real opportunity for thinking about how do you not just talk about what you've done up until now, but what does the next 10 years look like? Because as a buyer, you are looking to the future, right? It's progress to date is good, right? It forms the foundation of an investment thesis, but actually, it's what comes next. And the more the balance of growth comes from the target rather than the acquirer, the better, right?
Yeah. So how do they make you, how do they enable you to take that leap?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
not just
there's
what,
a confidence play.
yeah, not just the assets that they have.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So
So, how do you make the integration process of these acquired companies a bit more smooth? Like it can be quite hard to merge different corporate cultures and make it easy to get value from people. Especially if you've identified that that is part of where the value is in that company.
I completely agree. And integration is the sort of the collective word for uncertainty and chaos, right? I know if my therefore integration starts with people, right? If you don't immediately connect with the salesperson, the person in HR, the DevOps guy, all of those people will be thinking about it from their single lens. And I'm not being disrespectful of that. There's a very logical place. As the buyer, you need to address that and recognize it and reassure. Otherwise, you lose the cloakroom in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
And so integration starts with the people, and then the sort of the more tactical and technical steps can then follow, and they tend to, in my view, tend to follow the people. You need to give people, equalized communication access immediately. So, whatever internal tools you're using to allow your own employees to communicate, you need to throw that into the new business on day two. Right now, here's access to a new email system. Here's access to our Slack or Teams platform, whichever you use. You are a new part of the acquiring company. We're welcoming you, rather than that taking 2 weeks, because they will feel
yeah,
like second-class citizens immediately. Um,
yeah. It's like joining a new company and not having a laptop on day one. It's the same thing.
Completely agree.
It is the start of a new job for people. You see it in how people update their LinkedIn profile or present their CVs in time. Psychologically, it's a landmark for the end of an era.
Agreed, and they will have 25 legitimate questions on things that pertain to the business and the acquirer's enthusiasm for their part of the organization. Do we need two marketing teams? Are you going to invest in my office in Tokyo? Which operating system do you use? I really like Outlook. Do we have to go to Google Mail? There are dozens of little things that the more you can identify those up front and have the beginnings of an answer, even if it's we don't know yet, you begin to make the steps towards trust, where they see you as transparent versus avoiding the question, and then all that vacuum just creates more problems than you can imagine. So, and the part of integration is being very tactical once the transaction is completed and it's being announced. There needs to be a sort of a very focused team of people who are there living and breathing it to deal with all of those things as they turn up, because no matter how good the planning and the due diligence beforehand, someone will ask that you've never considered. That server's about to expire. Do we renew the license? What? Why would hang on? What server? When? It's happening tomorrow. What are we going to do about that, right? But we're cloud based, and you're talking a physical server, right? You need there goes 6 hours as you try and make a good informed decision about what you do with a piece of hardware, and that will turn up immediately. So there need to be people dedicated for the intense amount of work for the intervening, the initial weeks into months, to address all of those things as they pop up, and then it fades relatively quickly, and people go back to their day job.
And again, sorry to oversimplify, but it sounds like the key takeaway I'm getting is, really making sure that you've got the resources so that you can build trust with people to kind of like calm down the chaos and, give, a lot of upfront transparency and information to mitigate that uncertainty.
It is, and it's hard resource for a company to carry. Even big organisations like Verisk, the number of people who were absolutely dedicated to integration was one, right? and the rest of it is flexible, where you come from a finance background or an IT background or an HR background, and you play a role for a period of time. So it is always flexible, but you're absolutely right. It is hands on in a non-physical sense with how do you tackle the challenges that turn up really quickly. And so if good example, Kpler bought a business in Vienna, and we had to have people on the ground from the day it was announced. And there was an individual who led that integration over the next 6 months and was there every week. Part of it was just to reassure, part of it was to provide, certainly part of it was to get resourcing for certain equipment changes and lead the office transformation and so forth and so forth. But it was their day job every single day. And that was a very successful process because someone was given the task of leading it.
And recently at Kpler, you helped raise $200 million of external investment, which in itself is really interesting. But what I thought was pretty unusual is that they were only founded in 2014, and this was the first time that they had raised any external investment. Now, most people, when they're going out to raise funds for the first time, I don't know, it might be a small seed round of £1 million or something. It's a completely different amount of money and much earlier in their journey. So what kind of complexities did that add to the deal? If any.
There was a real discipline around how Kpler went from foundation to the scale that it had achieved, right? That sort of element of bootstrapping is both recognition of the business model, which is in itself incredibly value accretive, and the discipline of the two founders, Francois and Jean, were incredibly disciplined in the way that they strong dependency on technology, less focus on people, and no ego about building scale just by adding more people because it would look good on their on the website and on LinkedIn. And at the point of raising, it was clearly one of the sort of discussion points, and the respect shown by the investors for exactly, this is extraordinary. How did you get here? So there was interest in it, but I don't think it added complexity to the sale, and it certainly didn't lessen nor increase their normal scrutiny for, is this a good investment for their particular firm, right? They're still digging into tell me what customers are doing, and why would a customer review, and who else are you going to sell to, and what else are you building and growing, and where is the growth going to come from? None of those questions were less because we were bootstrapped. It was just a bigger ticket size, and so if anything, they were in awe as well as respectful.
Very interesting. It sounds like there had been a lot of discipline over the years within the business.
Just absolutely, and a sort of a relentless focus on delivering value. Let's build things people will look to buy, rather than vanity projects or products that don't necessarily connect with value.
Yeah, and it's easy to get distracted. So that laser focus obviously paid off.
Completely, and the business is very lean, right? It's sort of thanks to COVID, it's very, very remote first. I know there is very few roles that are sort of ancillary to building new product and driving the business forward, and that leads to great economics.
So I know that some of the companies that you've worked with, you've been involved in restructuring, and I know that one of the companies you helped restructure a leadership team and stuff. I think people are actually looking at how their C-suite is composed just now, and I can see some changes, and certainly there's, after a period of really low turnover, that's starting to pick up. So what tips would you give to maybe a CEO or whoever is being tasked with this project around looking at the composition of a leadership team if they're thinking about making some changes?
Good question, and it sort of harks back to the question of how do you scale. Which of the C-suite roles do we need to put in place? Who owns which responsibilities? Is a really difficult question. Is there more value in one role versus another, right? The CRO role versus a head of sales, in that kind of debate. And so, without getting sort of tied up into each and every role and what they might or might not do, at a more general level, it's creating a team that can fundamentally work together, right? And that sounds really, really obvious, but you are looking for people who are respectful of the team, are respectful for the contributions of each of the various parties, but also have enough authority to bring their self to the table and saying, I think we should do this versus this.
Yeah.
And that sounds simple, but it's not. I know people. It's very natural for people to represent just their own function rather than seeing the bigger picture. I think we should just invest in more salespeople. I think we should just invest in more engineers. And therefore, how do you judge which is a better investment? It doesn't just come from who shouts loudest at the C-suite. And so, having a team who think at a collective rather than just representing their individual functions is part of the balance. And so, whilst diversity has lots of meanings for different people, diversity of opinion, diversity of background and experience is what I think builds the greatest and most successful team. But it needs to be a team that is sufficiently consolidated that they can actually work together. They can't just be tearing each other apart and pulling in completely different directions. Otherwise, you won't make any progress.
Yeah, going back to what we were discussing earlier about communication, if that is not strong in a leadership team, it's going to filter down throughout the business. People will pick up on it. The messages will be inconsistent. And really, I guess what I'm picking up from you is it's just about making sure that how your team is constructed should be like aligned with what is the fastest way to grow and how do we get to where we need to be, what adds the most value to the business right now, alongside.
I agree.
Yeah, but then you can't just look at those are the roles. You actually have to think, is this new team going to work the same way? Because there will, you're going to have to mix up the dynamics if you're changing the type of jobs profiles that you have in that C-suite.
Completely agree. And part of creating a collaborative team is being very clear on who's doing what, right? You set up unnecessary conflict if you give overlapping responsibility. Who owns the voice of the customer is a great example. Is that a product only responsibility? Is that a marketing only responsibility? Is that a sales only? No, everybody has a very different touch points, and not forgetting customer success and the types of business I work for. And so, you need to disentangle that kind of I'm the single owner of the voice of the customer. No, I'm sorry. There are lots of people who can contribute to that understanding of who we are serving as a business. And so therefore being very clear that even though we're appointing a chief marketing officer and they bring all sorts of expertise, they don't singularly own in what some businesses is we're the voice of the customer. No, you're part of the discussion, but you're not.
Yeah.
That's not just your gig. And being clear and upfront on that is best possible, because that creates unnecessary tension in a business where it should just be what do all these signals mean? One part of a customer is saying this, another part is saying this, another part is saying this. What does that actually mean, and how should we best react to that?
Interesting. So I guess at this point in time, I going down a level from the C-suite. I think there's a growing sense amongst middle management and leaders who are nurturing that talent or working alongside them, that there just seems to be a real increase in pressure, longer work hours. I think people feel like there is a different, like there is a bit of tension, like they really have to show their value, and
Mhm.
stress levels are maybe slightly higher. I think you can see it in the way that some people are just responding to changes in work style between like return to the office. It's not that they're being
Yes.
asked to do it, it's like how they are managing that. But what do you think the C-suite can do to like get more out of like their team and their leaders without compromising their kind of like wellness and mental health further?
Good question. I've been with two businesses where, in fact, more than that. Sorry, is where trust is a critical sort of ingredient, and how do you get the best out of people, and creating an environment where somebody can excel, share their views, be bring to the table what they really are, rather than creating an environment where they are second guessing what you really mean or what you really are looking for. And so creating clarity of expectations is one of the most valuable things you can create as a leader, right? This is what good looks like. This is the outcome that we need. I'm going to partly delegate this because you've got all the skills to do that completely without me, but this I'm going to be involved with, and this is how we're going to work. And this is and allowing somebody to bring their approach to the problem. So how are we going to get to the goal is their problem, but being super clear on that, and critically clarity and what's important changes all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that I'm not talking sort of objectives over a whole year that can be written in January, and then you talk about it intermittently, and then it's finally ticked off in December. I'm talking about things that change on a weekly or a monthly basis, where at one point this is the most important thing, but then next week it's going to be something else because of an external environment. And being clear around that so that people can respond and know why. And then clarity is also context, right? Why is this important, right? And so all good strategic articulation into the business is, in my experience, it's just partly about giving context. Why
Yeah.
is this important? And the more people understand that, the more they can make well-informed decisions of what they're going to do to contribute, rather than going, I've just been asked to do this. I don't know why. It feels boring. And therefore, that's utterly demoralizing.
Totally. And context is absolutely crucial in, as a dimension in helping people to like feel like they're more in control of what's happening around them. And a lot of stress,
Agreed.
pressure, for many people, it comes back to, well, certainly for me, it's when I don't have, like, I feel like things are out of control that it is the most stressful. If you don't have
Mm-hmm.
any, if you're not able to have any autonomy and make those decisions yourself, then it's really hard.
Yep.
But I guess all of those
And,
things.
and equally, sorry, I interrupted you. Finish.
So I was going to say, but I guess all of those things are just about building trust and not throwing like fancy
Mm-hmm.
wellness offerings and well washing your business.
Yep. Completely, sort of at a very tactical level, it's understanding the people you work with, right? What motivates them, what's going on around their work version of themselves. Are they happy at home? Are they getting fit, or are they not? What's driving them, and then supporting how that connects with what you need to achieve as a business. And that's part of the it's not bending everything around and everybody gets to do what they want, because that's not how organizations achieve great things, but it's connecting what somebody brings on a Monday morning with what the business is trying to achieve. And so putting the right people onto the right task at the right time is part of the decision of the leader. And if you get that right, it's incredibly impactful. If you get it wrong, and you will, and I have, then it creates all of the stress that you're talking about, and you need to try and address those as quickly as possible when you realize you've made a mistake. Because part of the downside of thinking you can create clarity and context is often you don't know, right? And often it is not clear exactly where things are going or why things are changing, and that uncertainty can affect the C-suite and the CEO just as much as everybody else in the business. And so recognizing when you don't know the answer, I don't know if we're going to do this or this. let's just keep working on it until that becomes clear, is often help that somebody needs, right?
Yeah, totally. And again, we keep coming back to like words like clarity and simplification, and these are. I feel like we need to have a separate discussion one day about the complexities of those simple concepts.
Exactly, and the sort of things that I have learned over many years of too much adherence to business jargon rather than just trying to speak plainly, and dealing with your own uncertainties, let alone the uncertainties of your team, and all of this is a long term accumulation of skills and experience that we're all going through. So it's not done, nor is it I'm an expert versus not. It's they need to give people a bit of leeway with that in mind.
Mm-hmm. And but I think that in order to achieve any of those things, there's a couple of common like traits that will make that much easier in a leader. Like maybe like
Mm.
humility and having a bit more of a mature outlook to solving the whatever problem is at hand and looking a bit more long term. What are your thoughts?
Um, there are very different versions of leaders, and the definition
Mm-hmm.
of a leader has changed through time. The strongest and fastest and loudest of the old days is no longer, welcome nor the most effective way to, if you're running a coal mine, is quite different from working with knowledge workers or in any part of the business who have choices about where they work, and so thinking and using sort of business vernacular, thinking being a transformative leader, right? How my role as a leader is to help my team succeed rather than thinking through the mindset of they are there to make me successful or us just to deliver goals. And so thinking about how I help them achieve, what can I get in, what can I remove that's holding them back? What resources do they need? What support do they need? What clarity and context can I give them to allow them to flourish and therefore their responsibilities to be delivered? Is, I think, an incredibly effective way of working with talented people who want to be empowered and want to have responsibility. And that's how the example was set to me in many of my work experiences over the years, and something that I aspire to deliver to today.
It is interesting that ultimately there's a lot of stuff that goes into unpicking the complexity of a situation.
Completely agree. And I know there is the wonderful literature around dance floor and balcony. I can't remember the author of the book, but if you look up dance floor and balcony perspectives, you'll find it pretty quickly. But that kind of sense of being in the thick of it, i.e., on the dance floor, and trying to dance well and working with all the partners around you, not bump into each other, is one perspective. And most people are more naturally capable of doing that. As you get further up the responsibilities, you need to be able to sort of step back from that perspective and sit up on the balcony and
Mm-hmm.
observe how the whole dance floor is moving, and are they all in the same time, and are they all going the same direction, and then working out how you intervene. And the real skill is, when do you do what, right? How often do you
Mm-hmm.
step back from the fray? How do you step back from the daily grind and responding to emails and being seen to be onto something? Right? No, did you respond on Slack within 2 minutes of somebody senior asking you for your opinion? Versus, no, I can step back from the complexities of the tactical and really understand what's motivating a colleague or motivating the business, or dealing with the uncertainty. And I think this is a sort of a lifetime of learning to get that right. And the more effective you can move between those two states of mind, the better you are, because you have great awareness within business.
So, out of all the things we've talked about, we've covered off scaling and acquisitions and a bit about leadership there. Um, I guess another thing that I felt you had some strong insights into was there seems to be a number of companies just now in particular that have got like some really great products, but they're not achieving the success commensurate with like the quality and the usefulness of what they have
Mhm.
developed. What do you think are the key things that are holding those companies back from scaling? Like what is it that you think is stopping them from achieving their potential?
Tough question, Rebecca. I think
It's
because
obviously
there will
unique.
be. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There will be a contextual element to each one of those, and it won't. No, there could be multiple reasons why things aren't working, um, and and therefore you need to explore and keep turning over stones until you find the real reason something is not. No, is it product market fit? Is it the price point? Is it the design? Is it the sales pitch? Is it the market is not yet ready to is to pick up your new, Uber, whatever, to transform the way that they do things? Is it the resistance of the individual? And without talking specifics, I remember looking at a business that had this incredibly fancy technology about how you would, redevelop an oil field. The problem is the person who would understand the technology and be able to utilize it would also be out of a job when the
Mm,
technology is deployed. So you're
yeah.
trying to sell, Christmas to turkeys, and they just, it didn't work because of it. It fundamentally, never achieved its full potential. Even though, as an outsider, you would look at this and go, every big, energy player on the planet should be deploying this alongside their very talented people. That's not how it worked. And so,
Hmm.
if your business is not accelerating, there is, a really detailed review without any biases built in, without any sort of emotional attachment of going, but this is what I want it to be, and just going, what's not working, right? How do we overcome why we are too slow to market? Why our customer acquisition cost is too high? Why is the price point? And then you can presumably solve to that particular point, see if it works, right? And then iterate and iterate and iterate to refine the answer, because often it will be multiple things that need to be worked in
Yeah.
coordination rather than it being one change. It's never as simple as one change.
Interesting. So I think, really doing a bit of an audit if you're in that situation and getting an external set of eyes to review things, it's always going to uncover some new truths.
I think so. I'm reading a book at the moment, and it talks about how NASA, on the back of Challenger and Columbia, or Columbia and Challenge, both, and the awful tragedies that those two represented, being much, much more aware that they needed fresh eyes. And one of the processes they brought in was, as employees join NASA, which is supposed to be world class at everything that they do, was to bring in people who haven't yet been institutionalized to look at the processes of designing and to look at the process of signing off on, is this vehicle ready to go into space, just so that they bring a non-institutionalized approach.
Hmm.
And I know many companies will do this, but doing it systematically, of every new employee after their first 3 weeks going, in a safe environment, what do you see that's crazy, weird, slow, stupid? What can we be doing better? How do we tackle doing this? And particularly if those people have, a diverse background and have seen different things working in different organizations, that can be incredibly valuable. Of going, I don't know
Hmm.
why you manually enter data into Salesforce and then have to manually enter data into another system. Why would you just not link the two? Oh, you can do that. Yes, you can. Boom, and you're away, and you've got productivity gains all the way through.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know quite often. And I also find when you're taking that kind of approach, the there have been instances where some of the most meaningful insights actually come from some of the most junior people within
Yep.
the organization. You can't just think, oh, I'm going to get this person because they've been around, they've seen it lots. With
Yep.
sometimes that degree of um, naivety will really expose maybe, I don't know, like stupid work, for example, or
I
functional
completely
stupidity.
agree. Yeah, no, the Emperor's New Clothes was, and or the lack thereof, was pointed out by a child, and whilst it's a book that you read to your children, there's a wonderful lesson in there to, be able to call out things that are not optimum and can be improved, and the basics of why are we doing this again. And that
Yeah.
can happen at not just at a business level, but as a team. And I remember running a process back, all the way back in Woodmac, and I had read something that this was a sort of a clever thing to do. So I tried it out on my team, and it's like, what can we stop doing? And my team looked at me sort of slightly strange and said, "What do you mean we can stop doing? Well, what do we do? What processes and documents and things that we just do because we've always done them that we can just stop, and let's see if anybody starts screaming and shouting, whether it be a customer or an internal or audience." And we came up with a list of all sorts of things that we just stopped doing. We didn't tell anybody about it, and everybody's job was just a little bit better because we weren't doing this low value work that nobody was appreciating. And and I don't know what the measurements were of hours recovered in a month, but it was meaningful. And it was something that every business should be looking at to sort of know what can we just stop doing, because just doing it because we've always done it is not necessarily a good enough reason.
And now, in particular, is a great time to take that approach because there's so much happening with AI tools, like way beyond Chat GPT. You know, that really we should leverage that and turn that into an opportunity to have far more exciting, stimulating jobs that allow us to hit goals faster. We shouldn't be looking at that as, oh my god, we're, we're not going to do that anymore, my job won't exist. I don't think that that will be the case if you know you don't even have to learn how to leverage AI. You just need to make sure that you're adding like the right kind of value for the future.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and Chat GBT is clearly sort of on the tip of everybody's tongue at the moment. But there are much more humble productivity gains, whether it be how do you process expenses in your financial system. Without naming any particular provider, there are fantastic systems that are better than just entering it in a spreadsheet and submitting it through this painful process. You take a photo, you categorize, and it's gone. And
Yeah.
and the AI is there to automatically read the receipt, take the values, identify the currency, and all the things that would tend to create stumbling points for somebody having to process 1,000 people's receipts every day. All of a sudden it's being automated because the quality of the OCR is good enough to deal with iPhones taking photos of receipts. So it's less groundbreaking, but at the same time, nobody likes doing their receipts in an organization, let alone the finance department. And so you can save months of frustration by a very simple deployment of a good expense accounting process, rather than missing the opportunity to do that.
Totally. So, with all of the kind of things that we've discussed, what do you think are currently like the most important attributes for leaders to be thinking about if they're wanting to have that kind of high growth, scaling, successful company that might be acquired or list? What do you think is going to help them get there? But like, what can they work on in themselves?
Yeah, it's building on the dance floor balcony analogy, and leadership is about transformation, right? Now it could be incremental transformation, or it could be much more radical than that. But ultimately, you are changing the way people contribute. Whether it be just more, or we used to do it in this way, now we do it this way, or your responsibilities used to be this, and now they're going to be this. And and that transformation and that change represents a challenge to all sorts of people in an organization. So the greater awareness of who's affected, how they're affected, how do you support somebody deal with the loss of their responsibilities, or so forth. The more aware you are, the more sitting on the balcony, and then that means you can be more impactful in delivering what you imagine is the right thing to do. And this is a skill that I think takes, some seem to do it well, early on in their career, and perhaps have greater awareness, certainly for me, it's taken a long time to really appreciate that there's the technical elements of being effective in business and understanding how to read a balance sheet and knowing what certain acronyms mean and how does it work. But it all comes down to really how to motivate people. And,
Mm-hmm.
because everything is done at some level. And so how do you create the environment and understand all of the people around you, the stakeholders and the people that they represent? How do you navigate that? And it's negatively called politics, right? But I don't mean it in a negative connotation. I mean working with people to get things done, and at the right pace of change that you're imagining. It's I've made this mistake. It's very easy to imagine strategic direction. Tick. We know where we're going. Let's just go do it. It then takes you months to build the momentum, to create the case, to get people to believe in it, to actually then execute on it. So it might have been a great piece of work up front to intellectually work out what you do next. The real value is the next 18 months of what seemingly is like, God, we should have done this 12 months ago. We should have done this. No. That's the real value, right? When you create that momentum and the change to focus on a new area. So being aware of that is something you should be focused on, as every leader should.
Totally, people first, and work out how you can get that momentum and accelerate things as much as possible. So
agreed, and I'm not suggesting you go slowly, right? None of this is you can take your foot off the gas, but recognizing that major changes requires people to come with you, and announcing something and then expecting it to be done is not enough.
Yeah, and I think that taking that time up front to think something through is really valuable, because you're going to have that clarity. You're going to be able to provide effective context to people as well. And that you're not going to achieve
Agreed.
anything without their trust.
Totally agree.
So this has been absolutely fascinating. There's so many good tips around scaling effectively, what that really means. And if you're a CEO or a CPO in particular, and you were thinking about going through an acquisition, selling your company, or if you were thinking about acquiring one, and whether or not that was right for you and how you would go about doing that, then a lot there as well, I think, that people can take away.
Brilliant. Thank you. There have been interesting questions to try and succinctly answer. Hopefully we've got somewhere close.
No problem, Richard. Well, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and really interesting. I feel we could talk for hours about leadership and all of the different, frameworks and how to get the most out of people. I think it would be really fascinating.
There's no end to the learning, right? Whatever you think might work, there is always a different perspective or something else that's emerging. Social pressures on what's good is not a static thing, which is a good thing, right? And as we seek to be equal and have equality and equity in this, evolution is a big part of good leadership.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much. And we will definitely keep in touch and hopefully have you back one day.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
Thanks for listening to The Lucent Perspective. I'm Rebecca Hastings, founder and director at the Lucent Group, a tech sector executive search and talent consultancy. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. If you're a company looking to hire top technology leaders, or you'd like to discuss your next move, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email to rebecca@thelucentgroup.co.uk. Thanks again for listening today.